Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It has been a minute. I am feeling very out of practice, which I guess is what happens when you don't upload for 3 months. So basically, life got really busy. I was tied up in school, I didn't really have time to record videos, and I just kind of stopped making them. But I have finished the term, I've done all my finals, so I'm thinking about doing like large catch-ups on everything that I've read that I haven't talked about on this channel yet. But to be honest, that covers even more than just this year, because I stopped doing monthly wrap-ups after, I think, July of last year, because I realized that by the time I actually got around to doing the wrap-up, it was like midway through the next month and it just wasn't really working anymore, so I just kind of stopped doing it. So I want to catch up all of the books that I haven't talked about on this channel at all that I've read in the last 9 months. But there are a lot of them, so I figured it would make less sense to do it chronologically and more sense to sort of group them by genre. So this is going to be part 1 of 3, and I'm mostly going to be covering the YA speculative fiction, so like YA fantasy and sci-fi stuff. So I'm going to start off with the ones that have been rereads. So one of the series that I decided to get back into was the Abhorsen trilogy by Garth Nix. I think I first read this one back in late middle school, early high school, and I'd read the first book, Sabriel, since then, but I hadn't read the rest of the series at all. And I have been really wanting to get back into them, one, to remind myself what happened in these books, but also because there was a prequel that came out, and then there's also a sequel that just recently came out. So I wanted to refresh my memory of what happened, and then also eventually get into the new ones yet. So I have now reread the series, the original trilogy, which is Sabriel, Liriel, and Abhorsen. I have not yet read the new ones, but you know, hopefully that'll come soon. I think of the 3 of them, Liriel, the middle book, is still my least favorite, because Sabriel, the first book, is a very self-contained story. It introduces you to this new world where there's the Old Kingdom and Ancelstir. Ancelstir is very much based off of sort of vaguely World War II-ish England. And then the Old Kingdom is where magic works, and the main character, the Abhorsen, is the one who is in charge of basically undoing the work that has been done by necromancers and laying the dead creatures back to rest. So in Sabriel, a big evil is defeated, it wraps up all very nicely, and then Liriel is introduced, and it's like 20 years in the future and the narrative just slows down. So this one is still my least favorite, however, I feel like it does eventually all pay off in Abhorsen, the 3rd book in the trilogy. Things wrap up in a really satisfying way. I think the magic system and the world building of this is really cool. The way that death is described is like this river that has series of gates, and each gate has like a different trick to it or different challenge that you have to overcome, and the Abhorsen, you know, walks through all of these in order to do different things and also to lay the dead back down to rest. It's a really cool series and definitely worth checking out. The next books that I reread were in preparation for the release of Tempest and Slaughter by Tamora Pierce, so I went back to the Tortall world. So I started from the beginning with the Lioness Quartet, which is Alanna, the first adventure, In the Hand of the Goddess, The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, and then it finishes with Lioness Rampant. This is a quartet about Alanna, who is a female knight who disguises herself as a boy in order to train for the knighthood. She has a magical gift, and she also is under the watchful eye of one of the main goddesses in their pantheon. She has a faithful animal companion, which is a cat named Faithful, actually. And it's a good, fun series. This one, I feel like the pacing is sometimes a little odd in it, because it was originally meant to be one long novel that was actually meant to be adult fiction, and then she was told that that was never going to be published and that she should cut it down into multiple parts and release it as young adult fiction. So I think that the 4th book is much darker than the other ones, because it sort of gets steadily less and less YA. Also, these were written in the 80s, so there are some things that might read a little off to modern readers, like in Woman Who Rides Like a Man, she's spending time with a like desert tribe people called the Bazir, which, you know, I think for having been written in the 80s is handled very sensitively, but, you know, could potentially have some troubling things to it, including the fact that, like, she's better at magic than most of them and that kind of thing. So then after I finished the Alanna Quartet, I went right into the Immortals Quartet, because this is the one that I really wanted to get to, because this is the one where Numair is introduced, who is the main character of the prequel series of Tempest and Slaughter. So these ones are Wild Magic, which is followed by Wolfspeaker, and then Emperor Mage, and then In the Realms of the Gods. This quartet is in the same world as the Alanna books, but it's set, I think 10 to 15 years later. It has a main character named Dane, who is a 13 or 14-year-old girl who is coming into Tortle for the first time. She has a magical gift that lets her communicate with animals, so she is obviously my favorite. And the main drama of this one is that a lot of immortal creatures are suddenly appearing in the kingdom when they haven't been seen for centuries. And basically they had been like locked away in the realms of the gods for centuries, but now they're suddenly appearing and they're trying to figure out how this is happening, who is behind it, and all that kind of stuff. And it also introduces Newmare, who is then in Tempest and Slaughter, which is the next one. So Tempest and Slaughter came out in February. This is the prequel series following the chronicles of Newmare, or as he's called in this one, Aram Draper. So the main characters in this one are introduced in Emperor Mage, which is when they go to Carthak, because that is where he received his magical education. This one is so good. I would definitely say read the other books first, like don't just jump into the prequel series without having read the other ones, because you would understand it, but I think it's more fun if you've already read the original series that this goes to. It is so good. There are lots of little Easter eggs for the later series. I think it does stand on its own, but it's a lot more fun if you pick up on all of those little things. And I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of the series. I will be following this one avidly. I love Tamora Pierce, by the way. She's one of my just absolute favorite authors. So another of the YA speculative fiction ones is Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. This one got a lot of hype, but sadly didn't really do it for me. I thought that the magic system was interesting, but the plot was pretty weak. The three sisters are kind of indistinguishable from each other. I don't really have any emotional investment in which one of them wins the crown, and I probably won't be reading the second book to figure that out. So the next one is Winter Song. Unfortunately, this one is kind of in the same vein. It was hyped as like a labyrinth retelling mixed with The Goblin Market from Christina Ricci, which is an old Victorian poem. And that sounded awesome. Unfortunately, this one mostly suffered from pacing problems. I thought that the first half was really good, and then the second half just didn't do anything, really. So, I mean, the basic premise is that this girl's sister is taken by the Goblin King and she goes down into the underworld to get her sister back. And that sounds like a fun premise, but then it kind of just doesn't really pay off by the end. So the next book is All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater. This one came out... when did it come out? This one came out in October of last year, and I actually did go see Maggie Stiefvater live and got this signed, which was really fun. I have really loved some of her previous books. I liked this one. I didn't love it as much as some of her other ones. This one is very light on plot and very heavy on metaphor. And that can be fun. It almost felt more like an allegory than a fiction novel. So it's about a town in Colorado where there's this one family that has the ability to make everyone's inner darkness visible. And so the first miracle that they perform is bringing this out. And so there's like a literal, physical, fantastical manifestation of their problems. And then the second miracle is when they figure out how to resolve them for themselves and it goes away. Yes, it's very allegorical. I really enjoyed the main characters of this one. There are some members of this family, like Beatrice, who has been told her whole life that she has no feelings and has ended up kind of believing them. There's Daniel, who wants to change the culture of their family because they never actually interact with any of the pilgrims that comes by for a miracle. And then their cousin Joaquin, who is like a rogue radio station DJ. The characters are fun, the relationships are really interesting and complex. It just doesn't do a whole lot in terms of plot. Okay, so the next one is Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson. This is an urban fantasy about Native Canadian kid living, I think, off the reservation. And he is kind of a troubled kid. He's very sweet, but his family has all sorts of problems where his mom is a drunk and has lots of bad relationships, and he is like a part-time drug dealer. He gets into fights sometimes. And then throughout these stories of him, like, sort of coming into his own and figuring himself out, there's these little moments and little scenes that sort of slide his experiences out of the reality that he knows and into some kind of other fantastical world. And he doesn't really know what to do with these for a long time. He kind of chalks it up to like bad drug trips and all of that kind of stuff, but you know, eventually it kind of comes up that he is the son of a native trickster god. I really loved this one. I'm really excited to read more by Eden Robinson. I'm definitely going to be reading more of this series because the urban fantasy stuff doesn't really come into play until later in the story, and so I really want to see what happens in the next book when hopefully it's going to be there more front and center from the get-go. So next up is Akata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor. This is another urban fantasy. This one is about a girl living in Nigeria. She was born in America, but her family is Nigerian and they went back to Nigeria. And she is also albino, so she has to like wear a lot of sun protection when a lot of her friends don't. She feels kind of ostracized for it. And then it turns out that she actually has this magical ability that's been kind of passed down through her family, and she gets introduced to this whole world of people who know how to do magic, and she finds this new group of friends that also know how to do magic, and she gets introduced into this whole world, and then, you know, it turns out that there's an evil that they have to battle. This one is really great if you're a fan of like Black Panther and that sort of Afrofuturist or Afro-fantasy stylings. I think you'll really like this one. There is a sequel, Akata Warrior, that I haven't read yet, but is definitely on the list. And on kind of a similar note, the next book that I wanted to talk about is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. Holy fuck, this book is amazing. There are a few main characters in this one. I would say that the primary main character, if there can be such a thing, is a girl named Zaylee, who is what is known as a diviner, meaning that she has all white hair, and before all the magi were killed, she would have had the ability to become a magi later in life, and she would have had magical powers that were awoken in her. However, the king of the fantastical country that they're in, whose name I've forgotten, it's not a real place, about maybe 10 years before the book starts, killed all of the magi, including her mother, and has basically stopped any of the diviner children from reaching their magical potential. I would definitely recommend doing this one on audiobook. That is how I did it. It is narrated by Bonnie Turpin, who also narrated The Hate You Give. She is an absolutely phenomenal audiobook reader. I feel like this world really came alive. It is very rich and vibrant. I thought that the magic system was really cool. I thought that the history of it was really brutal, but really fascinating. And yeah, this one is just so worth it. Again, this is the first in a series. The other books haven't come out yet, but when they do, I will definitely be reading them. Okay, so the next book to talk about is Caraval by Stephanie Gerber. This one, unfortunately, got really hyped up, and I didn't really like it that much. It was definitely trying to capture a similar sort of vibe as The Night Circus, but with an added, like, mystery treasure hunt element to it. But it never really picked up off the ground for me. I felt that the characters were pretty flat. I felt that the main romantic relationship was just dull. And the relationship between the two main sisters is supposed to be like really emotionally intense, and she's supposed to be thinking that her sister is like the most important person to her, but it never actually felt convincing. And I felt like the plot was just kind of twisty for the sake of having twists, but without actually really backing them up and making them feel warranted. Okay, so the next one on the list is The Square Root of Summer by Harriet Ruder Hapgood. I almost put this one just on like basic YA fiction because most of it is a pretty standard girl is like recovering from grief of the death of her grandfather and is sort of coming to terms with her past relationships and her own history and her friendships and all of that kind of stuff, except that there is an added time travel element to it. This one is strange. I'm still not totally sure how I feel about it after reading it. I think it is pretty beautifully written in a lot of places, but left me feeling kind of mixed up. Like, I wasn't 100% sure what had happened, actually, because the time travel paradox stuff is never really explained, and I guess maybe it's not supposed to be. There's also a lot of times where she's going off about really complicated math that is actually mostly made up, so you don't really need to follow her, but also there were periods of time where I was just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Also, another weird thing in this book is that there are almost no female characters. Like, the main girl, Harriet, no, that's not her name. Like, the main girl, Gotti, I think, has one female friend, and then there's like a teacher that she interacts with a few times, and beyond that, there's like no other women. There's her father, her brother, her grandfather, who is dead in the novel, but there's a lot of flashbacks, her childhood best friend, who is also a boy, her ex-boyfriend. Like, there's just a bunch of dudes. There's very little women, and that felt really strange to be reading a book in 2018 where there's like no women. So I felt that the depiction of the grieving process was really well done. I thought the time travel stuff was interesting, even if I'm not totally sure what actually happened. But yeah, I'm still not totally sure how I feel about this one. I haven't sold it to a used bookstore because of that, but I feel like I might end up doing that because I don't know that I'm going to be reading it again. Okay, so the last little section in this video, I know it's been going on for a while, is the Rick Riordan section. So the first of the Rick Riordan books that I read was Serpent's Shadow, which is the final book in the Kane Chronicles, which is the one that focuses on Egyptian mythology. I have kind of felt this whole series that I just didn't really love it as much as the Greece and Roman books. I just wasn't really connecting to the characters as much, and unfortunately that did continue into the third one. I thought that it ended well, but it still just wasn't as good for me as the Heroes of Olympus series. And so once I finished with the Kane Chronicles, I then went and read the Magnus Chase series, which is the one that deals with Norse mythology. The ones in order are The Sword of Summer, the second one, and Ship of the Dead. This one I liked better than the Egyptian mythology one, but still I think the Heroes of Olympus is my favorite series so far. There were some things that I really loved about Magnus Chase though. For example, Alex Fierro. The way that the series really revolved around like the power of friendship and how his strength comes from his friends. The way that Magnus is just completely and utterly in love with Alex Fierro. And then Alex Fierro. Alex is a green-haired, gender-fluid character who I think mostly identifies as trans, but goes a little bit back and forth between feeling like a boy and feeling like a girl. And I love her, him, whichever pronoun they feel like having at the moment. And the final Rick Riordan book, and the final book that I'm talking about in this part of the wrap-up, is Trials of Apollo Book 2, The Dark Prophecy. The third book actually has just recently come out, so I will be reading that soon, but this is continuing the Trials of Apollo series. I believe it is going to be a 5-book series, since there are 5 oracles that he's trying to restore. I liked this book a lot. I still think, again, Heroes of Olympus was my favorite series. I think part of it is that I just really prefer when Rick Riordan is writing in third person rather than in first person. For some reason, I just tend to connect to those a little bit better, but this one is still great. Apollo is still a bisexual disaster all over the place. And since the third book did recently come out, I will definitely be reading that one soon. So that is going to be everything for this video. This is, again, part 1 of 3 of the large reading wrap-up of my last almost year of reading, and I will hopefully see you guys very soon with the next part. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!